Hello, everyone tuning in. We're here with Matt Anderson, TaxJar's CTO and co-founder, along with Jake Johnson, Director of Engineering for Integrations. So TaxJar is a leading technology solution for helping busy e-commerce sellers manage their sales tax. You've partnered with over 20,000 businesses and developers, and it looks like you've been working with each other for about 6 years.
Yeah,
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 we go way back.
Jake and I specifically, yeah, right around a little somewhere right around that 6 year mark. We've been working together on this, and TaxJar. I've been working on TaxJar, just the idea of TaxJar about 8 years. Um, so yeah,
Matt as a co-founder, I think he's always been CTO in some capacity. And I think my first title was developer evangelist, developer advocate. And then I worked my way up through the ranks to software engineer and senior software engineer and now director.
So Matt, I was listening to some previous interviews you had around pretty recently around COVID, and obviously it's not been easy for anybody. You shared sort of how your team has adapted by doing like happy hours, online games, or like kid talent shows. I thought this was really nice touch and just shows the company culture a bit. So I guess in short of spending too much time on this topic, and in short of saying I told you so to everybody else in the world who is now forced working remote, like has there been anything you've learned as an engineering leader during this last year that's kind of surprised you about remote work?
uh, man, I think yeah, I don't know if it surprised me, but I think it's something that we might not have put at the forefront. Um, is kind of how people talk about remote work. Um, because a lot of what people experienced this year in 2020 is not the remote work that we know. It's not the norm. It's not. It's kind of there's a lot of unexpected uh, life change and interactions and interruptions taking place. So, remote work for us is uh, it just fits our business, right? Like I don't believe it fits every business or every personality. I think there's not a there's not a truth here. There's not like this everybody should be remote or everybody shouldn't be remote. It's I think there's a lot of choice here. And I think that's what really succeeds for us. It allows those people we hire to work as a team in an environment that they choose to work in. So I'm always in my office. Like I'm at my desk. Nobody will ever see me on a video call somewhere else. Uh, but we have a lot of people on our team that they'll be at their desk, then they'll be on their couch, then they'll be in a hammock in their backyard, and then like outside of COVID, they'll be at a coffee shop. Like some people just need the change of scenery to be productive and kind of keep their mind sharp. And then like people like me, we like that focus comes in when you sit at your workspace. Um, and so remote work has just been really successful for us. I think a lot of companies do remote work, but they don't call it that. They call it asynchronous, distributed. You have multi offices. You sit by yourself in one building, but all the people you work with are overseas around the world. So a lot of people experience it, but maybe not talk about it. And so I think a lot of people this year realized some people realized they don't know what they're doing, and then some people realized, hey, we've been doing this pretty similarly. And I think those are the companies that are like starting to decide, let's go remote or let people have more choice going forward. So because they found out they were probably had a lot of those tenets about distributed and asynchronous work already starting to kind of percolate in their workflow.
And I think one phrase that encapsulates TaxJar's remote culture is remote first. We've always had a remote culture. We started off remote. So making some of these transitions this year in particular with so many challenges, some things have changed, other things have not changed. And I think we've been able to adapt.
Yeah, well, you certainly have had a head start. It's really great that, yeah, I mean, validating in a way, I'm sure, but it's a very effective way to get done a lot of great work. You don't need to be in the office, but I think a lot of folks are forcing to adapt to, yeah, a way that, like you said, it's not for everybody, but it certainly can work, and people are being shown that in lots of ways. Our business as well. I work with, yeah, my immediate team is like in New Zealand, Australia, UK, and San Francisco. So just the time zone piece is struggle for us, but yeah, remote first, making sure that everybody's included in the table, making sure the decisions are transparent and distributed. It's a good way to go. Cool. So sort of the things you probably talk about in interviews a lot, like I also ran across your mutual assessment, um, I guess, philosophy, and that's just really interesting to me. I've sort of seen this in that, you have like a sample app you distribute that's in the realm of the work you do, but you actually go a few steps further and actually bring them on as a contractor, a potential employee. And that's just like an amazing idea. I'm just curious, have you did that just evolve naturally, or did you steal that from somebody? Because it's a brilliant idea. I feel like more businesses should adopt.
Yeah, it can be a controversial idea actually, for because it's kind of unique. There's not a lot of companies out there doing this. I do think contract to hire has been around a long time, so like that concept's not new, but the way we're implementing it, I think, is totally different, and we're doing it for different reasons than what maybe traditionally larger companies have done. And I think it started where our first employee, when the idea was starting and we weren't making any money and we were just trying to get somebody in, and it's like we had a little bit of money and we're like, we hired somebody as a contractor because we're like, we don't know if we're going to be able to pay you. And when we got to know the person, we found out they were successful, and then we did everything we could to make them an employee, right? Like, and so just in that experience, I think we learned like there was some trust building in that first part. It wasn't the exact idea, but it was that moment where I think that's where it was born. And then going forward, we're remote work. We do not fly people across the country to meet us. And so, because that's a waste of everybody's time, I think, to force people to travel away from their families or, kind of their personal lives. But just to meet when you can do other things. So, yeah, we created this. We've seen Automatic and WordPress does a similar concept. So we had met them and heard a little bit about their process. We had seen it some other places just in concept, and so we've kind of really leaned into it. And it is a struggle sometimes. It's a big ask of those people interviewing for us time wise. But what I often say to those people that we're asking to do this process is, we want you as the person interviewing us. Like, we want you to come and interview the team, and being on a video phone call or asking back and forth questions of one another is a great way to kind of get a sense of somebody. But at the end of the day, I think working with the people you're going to work with, working on the projects you're going to be asked to be a part of, is the best way for both parties to really say, hey, like, this is going to be great. Like, I can see myself doing this for, a while. And I feel like I get you, you get me, you listen, there's respect, mutual respect there, mutual trust. And we've had a lot of people who've never done remote. And so this is their first. And we've had some people go, this is amazing. And they like dive headfirst in and they make the time for it and it works out. And we've had other people go, you know what? Turns out the remote work might not be my thing, right? Like, and this kept them from having to quit a job or to make big commitments and on both sides, and they can go back. They could take a job somewhere else because they haven't committed to a long-term relationship with us, and it's worked out. And we're not blind to the sacrifices that a candidate might have to make if they already have a job. We just ask for a few hours spread out over. Each role is different. Like, and we work out that with each candidate. So we've seen a lot of success. So I actually had a call with somebody a little while ago, just talking about their first impressions of it, and now they're after being in it, their impressions. And it's like, it went from like, man, that really was really helpful for me. Like, I felt better about my decision to either, if there's an offer on the table, I feel way better about accepting that offer. Like all of my like I met the team. You meet people you wouldn't have met in an interview process because you're actually given access to our, you know, if you're an engineer, you get access to our source code. You get access to stand-ups. You get to listen. You get to find out how well we run our stand-ups, and it's not just what the manager told you during hiring. So
Yeah, it's no lying there. That would work well for me. I've always gotten my butt kicked on like whiteboard or FizzBuzz type weeding out. I come
Same.
from like a non-traditional background. Yeah, it's great. It gives me a lot of hope. And
yeah,
I also,
we very much avoid that in our hiring process. We don't ask trick questions, and we don't try to kind of trip people up. We try to give them coding problems that like represent something they would have learned in whether it was school, right? Like we actually give the same technical interview to people coming out of like a place like Touring or Flatiron as we do to somebody coming into a senior role. We just have different expectations of how they get through it, right? Like they're going to talk about it differently. They're going to move through it at a different pace, but it's the same problem. It's not like, because we just think that that's more representative of how you actually will become a good team member. So
Yeah, you won't have to pull an all-nighter on leak code, Chris, if you're wondering.
just live coding, two people watching me just mess up a function. It's great.
Yeah, yeah.
That's awesome. You mentioned Turing. I saw you have, I don't know, at least on LinkedIn, like 5 or 6 folks who'd come out of there from different varying degrees of background. But I actually was in the first iteration of the Turing program. So I'm like a code bootcamp or like a code immersion school graduate. At the time, it was called G School. Jeff Casimir, the founder of Turing, had partnered with the Galvanized co-working space and started this thing in Denver, here where I live. And yeah, I graduated from that program. It opened up a lot of doors for me, but certainly came in from a different background. So it's super great to see that you've found so much, yeah, great talent from that pool. I just want to like call it out for the community. Turing, it's a Denver-based software school. They teach a lot of open source framework stuff, Ruby on Rails, Node, all sorts of front end programs. It's such a great place. You've had a great experience working with them, obviously, as well as other programming boot camps or immersion schools, they like to be called.
yeah, the two that we've most interacted with are Turing and Flatiron. We've one we've just met their graduates and then their network to start, and now we're kind of more engaged in relationship with both the schools around a fellow program. So we're bringing in people who are like just graduating and learning how to build that's a big thing about a small company that's growing is like you got to learn how to have a diversity of skill set, like level and years of experience now as we've grown. Our team's now in the 40s, of engineers at TaxJar. And so, when we were 10, it's a lot harder to bring in a recent graduate because you don't have that support. Like we couldn't offer support because everybody was so busy just writing code and keeping the lights on and all that stuff. And now as our team's grown, we've built up some capacity to help have that senior leadership, but also have some kind of early career people who now have enough people on the team that they're like able to learn, they're able to be coached in different ways, where in the past it's much harder when it's just a few people and you're all strapped for time. Like for me, it's not fair to those individuals who are kind of like trying to learn, right? Like if you can't give them that time to actually kind of show them the path.
Yeah, I think it's also been a time where the stigma of programming schools, like these immersion schools, are definitely fading away. Um, it's the remote work everywhere is also like opened up for a lot of cities that have a lot of these schools that maybe don't have as many junior roles. Now they can kind of look a little bit further and really find some great career opportunities across the board, especially with companies like yours. So it's awesome to hear. I kind of chirped up when I saw that. Um, so like I said, I had a bit of a not traditional background. I initially studied anthropology. So I kind of wanted to take a minute before we talk about code and APIs to sort of talk about like the anthropology of tax. I saw a really interesting thread of articles and stuff around 2018, which was the Supreme Court decision around it was Wayfair versus South Dakota.
Right.
Is that it? Yeah. So maybe just let you take the ball from there if you have stuff to talk about there. But I think it was a big pivotal moment for your business, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was a industry change, right? Like there was a shift for the market when that decision came down because it changed interpretation of and it changed precedent, I guess, in a lot of ways. It allowed states to start changing their rules, if you will, and Jake and I here with our teams at TaxJar, like one of the, we're writing code that's trying to make it easier to be compliant with all of those rules. And in the last couple of years, there's been more change in sales tax than probably the 20 years before that, just in the sense of there's more freedom to make changes, there's more legal precedent, I guess, or more power given to the states to try and find ways to get sales tax as basically e-commerce, right? Like so, TaxJar, one of the reasons TaxJar exists is because of e-commerce, and the growth of e-commerce is what I think me and co-founders were very interested in is what's going on with e-commerce, and that's why we're here. But as e-commerce changes the economy, and as more businesses move to e-commerce, like just like with any industry that's pushing the envelope, like the old rules stop working. And so they're starting to change the rules to catch up to how e-commerce works, the cross interstate shipping and sales, right? Like what our engineering team and our product teams really have to keep up with is trying to support the complexity in the US of how each state has the freedom to kind of define their own rules, and a lot of states use similar kind of frameworks, but at the end of the day, most states have unique qualities that kind of require custom rules in the sense that each state kind of can behave differently across products, product types, ingredients in products, and where it was sold within the state, how it was shipped. All that stuff all kind of come into play to the decision of how much tax is collected. And so that decision around Wayfair, I mean, it really changed a lot of things, which was really a cool thing because I think we had a blog post back then that actually was cited in the decision. So that was real fun for our team. So
For just a little like historical context for those listening in that I thought was really interesting. So this concept of economic nexus came around the founding fathers framing the Constitution when like the merchants from the South were traveling to the North, passing through a lot of states, and the states were taxing them on each passage. So the federal government sort of took over and said, no, you have to have a physical presence to tax a business. They can't just be transiting their goods. So e-commerce really just means commerce. We've changed the medium, but it's still the same concept.
Yeah,
So
there's so much
oh, yeah, go ahead,
complexity under the
Jason.
surface of tax. I mean, it makes for a great technical challenge. Like most people, oh yeah, I see sales tax. My checkout screen, this is how much I owe. But just behind that one specific amount, there's multiple rates at every jurisdiction level, right? So you have state tax, county, city, special districts. It's just amazing how many layers there are, and what we have to pay attention to on an ongoing basis with legislation changes like South Dakota versus Wayfair. It's a lot of fun, I
Yeah, no,
promise.
I seriously, I believe that challenging technical issues, yeah, make you think hard, and that's always fun. But I mean, certainly your friends and family must be like, oh, tax, so boring. Oh, like what a burdensome annoyance versus, I imagine what, you have to think about it differently if you get up out of bed every day. Like it ultimately is a fundamental building block of our entire society. So like, what's the culture of your thoughts on tax as a business? Because you've got to be excited about it to get up every morning.
I think what a lot of like I like and a lot of the engineers like is the challenge to take something that's been done one way for so long uh, and use technology to kind of bring a simpler, smarter, easier kind of a solution out, give people back their time, give people back their ability to focus on kind of the success of their business rather than compliance, right?
Yeah, at the end of the day, TaxJar is a technology company solving a very difficult problem with automation. And what gets me out of bed and also keeps me up at night is powering calculations for thousands of merchants, platforms that provide calculations for thousands of their own merchants, and just being able to write code that runs on Fortune 500 brands and entire platforms in production, that gets me excited. Just being able to help these businesses calculate and collect tax and then remit it down the road. It's a huge impact.
Yeah, in your business more than many others that I've seen is all about integration. How do you get the data in, or how do you get your systems in other people's data? So could you break down at a high level, like from what I understand, there's sort of two main use cases for TaxJar or how it gets implemented. You get users to get their data into TaxJar systems, or you allow people to integrate TaxJar's APIs into their existing systems. So is that sort of the twofold way? You've got like APIs that you offer as a service, and you've got like deep integrations with many e-commerce and other types of apps that get data into your systems.
Right. We have API-based integrations where a partner can use our API directly and push transactions into our system themselves. And then we also have direct integrations where we can pull down transaction data from platforms like Xero using a REST API and bring in the tax jar for reporting and filing as well. But yeah, integrations is the primary thing that I focus on at TaxJar, and it's such an exciting area to explore because we have to integrate with hundreds of different platforms, all kinds of different types of platforms, e-commerce platforms, ERP systems, accounting platforms like Xero, order management systems, recurring payment billing solutions like Stripe. And so each of these platforms are completely different, right? They all have a different way of managing data. The data model behind an underlying order or refund transaction can vary significantly. And we need to make sure that we design an API that works well across all these different types of platforms. It hasn't been easy. There's a lot of challenges.
What do you think the first integration was? I mean, maybe that was back in the original days, or
Yeah,
maybe it
Matt
was
can
in your
speak to
days.
that.
Yeah. The first one that I wrote was for PayPal. Um, and so really that was pulling in. So that was like the ingestion of data was that first.
And that was SOAP based, right? SOAP XML.
Yeah. Well, yeah. They have their API. I mean, that was 2012, so that was a long time ago. Like they were changing. Amazon was our second. Um, that was when Amazon was really starting to kind of become a place for third parties to sell. So those were some of our first two, I think. We've done WooCommerce. We've built an integration with Xero that's a little different than other, like provided some accounting features. We've worked with that. Yeah, Shopify. There's so many that we've been, whether it's offering calcs, helping them at the time of checkout or order or invoicing, or at the time of like, oh, what do I do with all this? I need to help somebody to help me file it. And that's the ingestion part to help us kind of summarize and build that out.
When you were at the beginning and sort of starting these first few integrations, realizing that you had a product people were willing to pay a lot for, what was like the moment that you left? You were working at a database job before this, like 8 years ago. Like when did you leave that job to come to TaxJar full time? Because it sounds like you worked on this idea with this set of people before sort of taking this full step. So what was like the first one? Were you it had a couple integrations, or where were you at personally in your career when you decided that this was something you wanted to focus on?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think when you start something, I was in a position that I could work nights and weekends. I could squeeze in some effort. We were able to hire somebody to do some other work for us. So that kind of why we kept our day jobs and kind of, couldn't give up buying food for the family and paying rent, right? So uh, it was after, for me, it was after some customers. We hit some customer kind of milestones, and we had a little bit of kind of investment into the company that kind of helped make that decision to kind of come on over full time. That was a lot easier, right? Like it wasn't as risky. There was at least a little bit of, well, we're not going to run out of money next month. We had a little bit more than 30 days of money. So, but yeah, I think we looked at customer count, right? Like it was like, man, we've gone from like we had. I remember we got the first person paying. And it's like, okay, cool. Like somebody will pay. Somebody in this world will pay for this idea at least more than 1 month, right? Like they'll pay. Then I think we started at $9.99 a month, $9.99 a month. Somebody renewed. The first customer renewed for their second month, and it was like, wow, okay. Then our goal was like, let's get to 100, and then from there we were like, let's get to 1,000. And that first 100 really kind of was meaningful from there's a business here, and then we went from there.
And Jake, do you have like a memory of when you first started? Because it sounds like, I mean, you both are, partners at this point, and that you've worked
Mhm.
with each other for longer than most people in the technology community have. Um, when did you realize that this is something you wanted to like kind of devote your life to in a sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. So prior to a few startups that I began before TaxJar, I was e-commerce developer, Magento,
Oh,
and also a consultant. So I built a lot of Magento themes and extensions. I was a big part of the Magento community, and I heard about TaxJar through a mutual investor, and I got to talk to Matt and Ryan and Mark. And Ryan also had a background in Magento. So early on, there were some just positive indicators from the founders and the team that this is an exciting opportunity. And just given my background working with e-commerce companies, I knew that sales tax was a challenging problem. So it was apparent to me early on, and I think uh, the first year that I was at TaxJar and just getting more involved with the domain of sales tax and just seeing how we were growing, just continued to reinforce, the rocket ship that I just boarded and some of the opportunities around that.
I actually worked on Magento at my first web developer job. It was tough. I remember like some of those
It's not easy. Yeah.
PX HTML. What are those embedded templates called?
PHTML maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a nightmare. And then our agency, we were doing a lot of Ruby on Rails. So our team built a gem called Gem-Gento. We basically had a Magento instance and a Rails app, and it would re-index the Magento database into the Rails database. So you could build beautiful front ends and like Haml and stuff. But all these like fashion companies wanted all the analytics and tooling that went around with the Magento backend that nobody could reinvent. So
Uh, so you kind of wanted to
I,
use Magento as like a headless API and then build out the front end yourselves.
yes, and I went to a
Yeah.
Magento conference and tried to pitch that to a bunch of PHP developers, and it was a learning experience for sure. Cool, guys. That's awesome. So, on the integration front, Xero's had a huge effort to sort of standardize our API access. We had these three custom app types, which I'm sure you're heads down into March, figuring out how to migrate to auth 2, which I'm happy to be a resource and connect on that later. But
Yeah.
just talk to me about like open source standardizations, OAuth 2, OpenID Connect. Like how big are those in, the maintenance of these probably 50 plus integrations you now have? Different tiered status. Like I'm sure some are deeper than others, but there's what is that world like as a an engineering leader in your own org to just manage that process? It must be a lot of work.
Yeah, so the way we handle authentication right now, it's a lot simpler. We don't use OAuth grants. We have simple token-based authentication, similar to Stripe, where you can generate an API token and pass it directly into the header. So we don't have any concepts around refresh tokens, access tokens, but it's something we definitely need to look into the future, right? Because does provide a lot of advantages out of the box, especially when you're building API integrations type of platforms. So in the future, we would like to provide, or at least we're going to consider exploring OAuth, being able to provide fine-grained permissions per application that you connect to your TaxJar account, and also explore OpenID Connect, of course, and make it easy for platforms to bring users into TaxJar more efficiently. So yeah, that's where we're at right now. We mainly provide token-based authentication.
So that's your API authentication when people want to sort of connect and get data out. What about like the shop? How do you authenticate with Shopify's and now PayPal's and stuff? Because you have to sort of bend to whatever
I
they
see.
offer as
Yeah.
APIs, right?
Right. Yeah. So we build some integrations in-house, direct integrations with platforms like Shopify or Xero. We mainly use it. We're probably familiar with it. We use OmniAuth and OmniAuth strategies to connect
Nice.
to these platforms over OAuth. And my co-founder, my previous startup, he actually started OmniAuth and Grape, which is pretty cool.
Wow, it's a good connection to have.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think part of your question, Chris, like, once you build an integration, like we have a couple strategies. Because of the different types, we have the ones that are just ingesting, like, and because that's just all they need to do is move data in. We have some that kind of go both directions, where it's like we help with the calcs and we put the data in our system. And so depending on that, like we build code that we host, and typically in that scenario, yeah, we have to deal with the OAuth, and we have to deal with version changes. So like as a Xero changes their API, like now we have to respond, right? Like we have to, like, that has to be a response to us. And just as people work with us, if we change our API, they have to. And then we also build code. This is the harder scenario. We build code that is deployed on other people's servers through Magento, WooCommerce. Like we built it. It's an open source plugin. Like we maintain them. But now, like, we have to give up that control where now they're deployed in the Wild West of, we don't know about your server, right? Like, what are the specifications of your server? How big is your database? How much memory? Like all those things. How many other extensions have you installed on your Magento or WooCommerce installation that now we have to figure out how to support as well, right? Like, and validate that, yep, we're compatible or not compatible with this, pretty much infinite combination
Yeah.
of of extensions and plugins that may or may not override what we're trying to do with their checkout to give them the sales tax support. And our team works, like, both of our engineering and our customer support organizations, like, they work tirelessly to try and, like, keep up to date with all of those combinations, and at least have a documentation that says yes or no, we do this. So I mean, I think as an API developer, extension developer, most people will kind of be familiar with that, of like, man, I built a great extension and it works on the default install, and then it's like, what does that business do with the rest? How many times do they change their theme, and how many times do they, are they installing and uninstalling extensions? And that's definitely part of our support now. But it's unintended, or it's unexpected, I guess, when you build it from the start. You're like, oh, I built a great integration, and then you forget, oh, they just changed how this works. Like WooCommerce changes a lot. We started with Magento 1, and now we're on Magento 2, and so you have to keep up with that as they start the transition of their user base and encourage them to go to Magento 2. We have to make sure our extensions are now available as well. And so definitely a big part of what Jake and his team have done the last couple of years, for sure.
Yeah, telemetry into external environments and understanding what's running in those environments is a big technical challenge and also a big support challenge. And so we try to do what we can to send things over their API using something like a user agent string to get up-to-date version information on the environment, and the TaxJar integration, and also just more logging and diagnostic capabilities to better support our customers using those integrations.
Part of my job at Xero is managing the part of our SDKs that we officially support. So I work on like the Ruby and the Node one, and it's been a challenge for sure working with open source code and hey developer, what version are you using? Oh, like can you do this? Can you do that? But we've migrated everything to be built off of an open API spec. So at least it's helped us to sort of flush up product changes. We're not just fixing one deserialization bug in the Ruby client, we're sort of fixing it at the API level. And it's helped us sort of segment our customer support and API support because they're a little bit different in, the accounting space of the types of users because, it's just the costs of automation are seen elsewhere sometimes when you build these systems up. So I feel your pain there. And yeah, great, great suite of integrations you have though. I've noticed that you had sort of tiers of, probably top used versus other ones. Are any of those community contributed, or it's all sort of developers in TaxJar who are building these?
Yeah, many of them are built in-house, and we also do have a collection of API clients, like you mentioned for Xero, right? So C#.NET, PHP, Node, Ruby, Python, Go, and so on. And all of that is built and maintained by one of our engineering teams around API and integrations. We do also have a lot of third-party integrations out there in the ecosystem, and we have a certification program built out around that to establish best practices, like how to properly send over data to us for calculations, and also how to push transactions in TaxJar. And there's a lot around that as well. We have, I like to call it artisanally handcrafted API documentation, along with integration guides and quick start guides that help folks and developers get up and running right away.
Yeah, a lot of engineers might not know this, but I think it's something that if you're looking to be an API developer, like we have a great partner team, like business development or partnership team that work with us, to help us with that certification process. So third parties can, like, we can encourage, them to build, or we just, there are some open source ones out there in the community that we don't have anything to do with, but that's because we made an API available, right? Like you make it available, you make it easy to use and document it well. Like we've seen extensions pop up for carts that we didn't know. And then our partnership's a great, tries to meet them or in different capacities, right? Like depending on the kind of integrations they are or the impact that they've made. So that's been, I think that's an interesting thing that, you just talk about the engineering side. It's like the engineering's like Jake and his engineers actually work hand in hand with the business partners on our team to actually like expand this. Not necessarily through writing code, right? Like not necessarily like we actually can build integrations without writing code sometimes. It's just through just making that API accessible to more and more people.
It's really exciting too to see random startups and e-commerce platforms just announce they integrate with TaxJar. And we had no idea it happened. It's like, oh yeah, you just sign up for an account, got your API token, you build an integration. Awesome. Congrats.
That's super cool to see your business sort of empower other businesses to have a business. Like that's what the greatest part about these like ecosystem API centric economies, buzzword, but seeing a business build value off of your data and use it in a way that you could never even anticipated. Like, that's like the biggest joy of my job as a DE. I get to work with partners, large like yourself or small. That's just a one person team who realized that some report we had wasn't solving like the niche of I don't know. There's so many. I can't even like anticipate what people come up with. We have like horse barn CRMs, like posting invoices into their accounting ledgers, or yeah, different types of reporting mechanisms or different tax solutions. So it's super cool, and then it just empowers so many different entrepreneurs to build such creative things when you open up your product to sort of the floodgates of an API, for better or worse. Comes different maintenance problems and engineering challenges, but super gratifying, I bet.
Definitely.
So the tech stack I went through and totally love it. If I'm right, Ruby, Rails, Postgres, Sidekick, Vue, tried and true technology. I've been primarily a Ruby on Rails developer for 7 years, and now I've switched into more developer evangelism type work. But kind of like my dream stack. other than like me loving over it, like what is that stack doing for your business to help you move quickly? Like, why did you choose that? Is just where you were at the time, or has it been a conscious choice to keep that over time?
So you missed one, which is Elixir. Um, but that's newer. So we did start Ruby on Rails from the beginning. That was where I was. That's what I wanted. I thought that was. We didn't start with an API. Like our business wasn't an API business when we started. Like the first lines of code were more about ingestion of data and reports and filing kind of focus, like helping people get to that filing spot rather than the time of transaction. So Ruby on Rails made sense for that, right? It was so easy to get a web app going. It was where I was personally, what I was trying to work with. I still stand by it. I think our team stands behind Ruby on Rails is a great stack for web apps. Just works. It's simple. It's easy to work with, and a lot of tools available. So we did start on Heroku as well. So we've that was a great choice for us. I would probably do that again. It enabled so much for us. It took so much off of our plate, so we could actually focus on the product. We are now on an AWS cloud kind of setup, but yeah, it's worked great. Postgres, I love it. I have a background working with Oracle databases. I've worked with MySQL as well, but Postgres has been great. It provides enough. It's got a great community that I mean, there's new versions and new updates all the time. So it's really been fantastic. And it grows well with us. And it has. Let's see, the last couple years, Elixir kind of made its appearance in our stack. And it's actually how we run our APIs now. So our API started on Ruby on Rails. Like, so we started with, we just built our APIs with Rails and made that available. Back in 2014, I think is when people would have publicly first seen our API, and our docs appeared. But now Elixir is kind of our team. Our team did a couple of years ago, did a couple prototypes and proof of concepts with, oh man, I think it was Go and Elixir and Ruby. Like we kind of just took the three of them and put them head to head, and we made a couple decisions. And one of the most important decisions we made wasn't just performance, but was we had a whole bunch of Ruby on Rails developers, and Elixir kind of was speaking to them, I think, more so than Go. And so we've seen. So that was interesting to me, right? Like my team made that decision. Like Alec Carper, our VP of engineering, kind of led that process and that decision. But it's really paid off for us. I think we worry less about trying to make Ruby on Rails performant for an e-commerce scale. Like we worry about the functionality of it rather than the scale, because I think we picked a language or a stack in the way we've set up Elixir that just kind of does what we need it to do, and we don't have to think about it. It's just the right tool for that API for us. So it's been exciting, and now we get to hire Elixir engineers, and I think one of Jake's team members actually is a co-host of an Elixir podcast, and so it's been a good addition. And we start seeing more and more Ruby on Rails developers like, oh, can I go work on some Elixir stuff? So it's been a good experience for us.
I think we're going to continue to invest in both Ruby and Elixir in the long term because each language has their own unique advantages. And just FYI, I think we processed 7.75 million API tax calculations per day during Black Friday, Cyber Monday. Wow. And I think Elixir really saved us for that kind of volume. Like it's allowed us to scale our API so well over the last few years and allow us to onboard entire platforms.
That would be the last sort of like dragon of a technology question I have of how your platform works. ATO, IRS, every other acronym of every other tax agency on earth. Um, I'm seeing that as like like other than the APIs and the maintenance of integrations everywhere else, it seems like the other side is where do you get all this tax data from? Like I imagine I can go to the IRS and download some 16 gigabyte CSV of all the tax codes and their variations. Like how do you get tax information automated that's changing around the world from different localities into your system?
If only they had a 16 gigabyte file. That
It's just
would make it easier.
raw text.
The yeah. So it's not the IRS, but um, um, because sales tax is not federal.
Oh,
Um,
local. Yeah. Oh,
but
wow. Okay.
yeah, we do have a tax team. So I mean, we have people on staff that their their skill set and their role is around, you know, there's different areas, right? Like we call it tax geography. Um, at least internally, I don't know if anybody else uses that in the economy, but we call it tax geography. Like their team, like some of the skill sets they have are in GIS and shapefiles and ArcGIS software, and they go like whether we automate the download or we go out and actually you know source get the downloads from the states or some other third parties that are really good with address data. We go get them. Then we kind of make them our own. So like you can get zip code files. Well, zip code files don't don't do tax, right? Like not every state uses zip code files or zip code lines borders for all of their tax rules, right? Like sometimes they're like, we don't care. They draw an extra circle outside of it or they cut it in half for whatever reason. So our team does a lot of that. So there's a lot of manual stuff or magic and expertise that comes out of that. Then you have the expertise in tax that is around the laws, the regulations around uh, the rate, the product types, like different product have different rates sometimes, the holidays, the um, the tax types, the licenses, and so we have researchers and tax expertise um, that helps kind of through manual or automated different means kind of collates that data, and we have our own system, right? Like we have our own system of data structures, tools that suck that data in and make that data usable to the rest of our system through tax. So like our tax calculations, when you put in that address and you put in all the line items with your product tax codes, like, and you get that instantaneous like millisecond, couple millisecond response back. It's gone through all of that data and basically says, here's you charge 5%, or this item at this address and that sourcing address is this, and you got all that answers. So, but yeah,
Picturing like a
that's definitely a challenge to get all that data and keep it up to date. We are, whereas business is moving fast with technology, you do see governments don't have that same ability, right? Like state governments, local governments. There was a time, I think we got mailed maps and data, right? Like, so we were mailed paper maps. We've called cities in different states and said, hey, what are your lines? Like you talked about them, but you didn't like put them online, right? Like they didn't publish them, but they mentioned them, and it's like, where is that? Oh, they're at this guy's house. Like it's like a literal like it's like blueprints that they don't have the budget or they don't have the know-how yet in some of that. So there's always those little stories of trying to get kind of that data into your actual structured system.
picturing like a SWAT team of tax auditors going around the country, just pitching back tax data into the data lake.
It's kind
Super
of
cool.
well, they don't have to travel, but it's kind of what it is.
What blows my mind is that you can have a different sales tax rate than your neighbor across the street. It's really fun to watch analysts in our team work in a program like ArcGIS because they're literally tweaking points in a polygon to make sure that a tax rate is correct for a house in a cul-de-sac versus a house down the street at the border of like some kind of jurisdiction at the city or the county level. It's just insane.
Wow, that's wild. But it's a problem that I've seen a lot in my day-to-day work, working with app partners, especially as Xero becomes sort of a bigger player in the United States. QuickBooks, obviously, elephant in the room there, but we are really leaning into our API and our ecosystem partners to sort of solve the hard problems that come with the U.S. market. Mainly tax, bank feeds is a big one. We just pushed out like a Chase bank feed integration, which is huge. Help small businesses sort of automate reconciliation and whatnot. But yeah, like our ecosystem, you're a big player in there. We've got some other folks who are solving tax. I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are on maybe some of the other competitors doing this type of problem solving. The only one I really know of in my research was Avalara. But like, can you talk to me about like how you categorize yourself and your product solution? Well, like maybe if like some technical differences of how those systems work. Because for a programmer who's learned accountant concepts backwards and for programmers learning tax concepts backwards, I think it'd be really helpful for the community of people watching this. Like, how do you break apart such a complex industry through your competitors?
Yeah. Jake can maybe get into some technical differences between our APIs if that's interesting. But uh, having competition is great. I think I actually kind of enjoy it. It makes for uh, one, you can learn a lot about the industry from your competition, and you can learn from them. But it gives you something to shoot for, right? Like you got to stay sharp. We Avalara, as you mentioned, like we see them all the time. They're well known. They're usually kind of the people customers find along with us that are that we're kind of going head to head. They've been around a little longer. They've been around longer than us. They're now a public company. In the last couple of years, they went public, and so they do a lot more than sales tax, and so they have a much larger business line, like a line of business than we do. So you'll see them in different places and different kinds of some businesses. So our focus, right? Like I would say, just simply, our focus is on sales tax and kind of that value add tax. It depending on there's different ways people talk about it, but kind of that indirect tax that's happening. That's what we're focused on, and really that e-commerce, that commerce, online commerce, where connected commerce situations is what we're focused on. So that's one way we kind of differentiate. There's other players you've seen this year. Vertex is another company that's been around for 40 years, and there's a few other large ones. As you kind of list out the names, you'll notice too, like a lot of these are enterprise focused. Nobody is, as we're aware, as I'm aware, we have probably the most customers in e-commerce of any of the sales tax providers. We serve sales tax solutions to the most e-commerce customers. Now, that plays out where we started at the lower end, they're starting at the higher end. So that's another way we've kind of seen that. And I think you see that in the accounting space too, where, different companies are all meeting in the middle. And because they had a solution, like you either have a solution for, you pick a business kind of persona that you're going to go solve for, and you work from there. So that's been a lot of, that's how I look at the market. Technology wise, I think we're more modern. I think some of that's just luck because we started more recently. So like you have that advantage of not having 40 years worth of technology to figure out what to do with. So we have that modern. And, I think we've made some other decisions within our API that kind of differentiate us, and I think I'll let Jake kind of talk about maybe some performance or some other differences that kind of really stand out.
Yes, I'd love to jump in. When a developer asks me, how do you compare to your competition? I ask them to do two things. One, go to salestax.dev and look at our API documentation. Two, go to our status page at status.taxjar.com because you're going to find out several key things. First of all, our performance and our response times. For calculations, it's typically under 20 milliseconds because we're using Elixir. And that truly matters when you have to calculate tax in the checkout process in an e-commerce website, because any longer it can impact conversion, right? If it's longer than a second, the customer may leave your website and you won't land that sell. Secondly, uptime. So we guarantee 99.99% uptime, and our competitors generally promote 99.5% or less. And so that last 9 matters a lot. We've done the math, and I think it's more than a day's worth of downtime between 99.5 and 99.99%. So that's two key points that I tend to make when people ask us how we differentiate. But also, I think what TaxJar does differently is that we truly care about the developer experience. And like I said, we build our API documentation and all of our clients from scratch. And we spend a lot of time just making sure that our endpoints are easy to use, both calculations and getting transaction data in the TaxJar. We spend a lot of time making sure that we get it right and that it makes sense. And we provide enough resources for developers to build an integration quickly.
Your developer portal is awesome. I just want to call that out. Was able to sort of get into the weeds of how to make API calls and understand your data model. Super easy, which is not what a lot of even API first companies can say.
It's a big credit to Jake. He's kind of influenced and created many of the pages there, or at least the framework for him. That's been really helpful. And to Jake's, to some of what he said, if you can, when you're building APIs and integrations, if you can get the developers on your side, that is that changes the sales conversations. It changes adoption, because if you get the people who, man, it's just easier to work with the TaxJar, right? It's just easier to connect. I read their docs and I already knew what to do. I didn't have to get on a phone call. I knew how it worked. And I think that's been our approach. Is we've seen that in other industries, right? We've seen that with other API companies that provide APIs. It's man, I like working with those, and we want to be that for other developers. We want to continue to provide that. And so I think, our competitors are going to try and do that, or say they do, or whatever. Everybody should, I hope, right? It's good technology, but not everybody's going to pull it off. And so, I think we've done a really good job there, and it really goes a long way when you get a CFO on the line, or something that says, my developers told me I need to work with you. And that changes the whole conversation, because now they know they can get it built because their developers are ready to work with us. And that's a great thing. That's a good goal when you build API docs. That's a good goal when you're building an API product. And I think we've had some success there.
Yeah, the only thing we ask for is a level playing field. Just give us a chance, consider us, compare us, and we're confident that we can deliver on a good solution.
Yeah. Nothing's certain but death and taxes. It could be your sales motto. I mean, you gotta do this. My girlfriend was working at a business that was using a lot of online sellers, and they did not incorporate their tax correctly, and was in for some serious pain. So if you're a small business out there and you have a digital footprint and you're selling online, you've got to check out TaxJar. And I mean, we've gone over the hour, which is always a good sign. It means we have a good conversation, full of a lot of great stuff. Thank you for taking the time today. I always like to ask the guests sort of at the end, we are obviously in this shared industry, accounting, tax. We leverage each other. We make each other better in many ways. And we have a lot of the same customers. We strive to be better. We're a very human company. We try to make relationships with all of our app partners and make sure people can have outlets to improve our product and make things better. Just sort of want to open up the floor and see if there's anything you'd want to sort of address to the Xero community and specifically or anything about the Xero product that you have felt has made your business sort of excel in a way.
I think it's so important for a platform like Xero to think about everywhere a merchant transacts. They're not just selling on one platform. They don't just have a shopping cart. They're selling on marketplaces like Amazon and eBay and Etsy. They may have an ERP platform. They may have a point of sale system. How do we ensure that we can get all of their data across all these channels, not just in the TaxJar, but also into Xero? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, Xero is the source of truth. Xero is where all the transactions live as part of an accounting platform. And merchants depend on that data living within Xero to be able to um, get their taxes done, figure out uh, the reports, their accounting reports, and so on. Xero needs to make sure that you can get all that data in sufficiently.
Yeah,
And there's a lot of challenges that come with that too, right?
it's a tough problem to solve, and I know a lot of folks are really glad you're solving it, us included. So it's great to have a partnership with you, and it's great to just put relationship to our digital relationship. So excited to like work with you guys in the future and sort of listen to our shared customers and make sure that we solve the needs of those who kind of depend on our product to fuel their own businesses and fuel their own kind of entrepreneurial mindsets.
Yeah, once you start learning about sales tax, I think you're going to look at your receipts differently. I think that's the funniest thing about sales tax is now when you buy things online or when you buy things in person, you're always kind of like, is that the right rate? Are they doing this right? Like, are they using the right POS, or are they using Xero or Shopify or whoever like to get this correct? So I always find that as a funny kind of outcome as you get familiar with sales tax. You start like the mundane, something that was so mundane and just you accepted before, is now you start thinking about it. To what Jake said at the end there is like, as a business or as a platform or integration partner, like that becomes less of a oversight, or just something that's there, and now you start thinking about what that number means. Like, that business that collected that sales tax now has a responsibility to do something with that money, and that's really important. That's an important next step, and I find myself way more observant about that. Just going to the grocery store, or doing something of like, hey, I don't think you're doing this right. Maybe you should use one of these, tools out there, right? Hey, service provider giving me an invoice. You should look into an online tool that can do this for you and get your taxes right. So that's a fun little anecdote of just starting to notice things as you get familiar with this sales tax, right? Getting familiar with sales tax, that's been around forever, and as you get familiar with it, you start noticing it more and more in life.
I think in certain states it's more noticeable than others, right? I mean, some states don't even have sales tax, whereas you have states like New York where you have to pay tax if your bagel is sliced, but if it's unsliced, it's totally exempt. You don't have to pay tax on it. There's just so many interesting quirks, and that's
Wow,
what makes our country great.
it is land of the free and very discombobulated often.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's awesome. I did not ever factor that in. I always just thought, oh, of course they know how much sales tax it is. But now I will ask them, hey, is this POS integrated with TaxJar?
Well,
Oh,
yeah. I mean, it's like it's a. I mean, as you get in whatever business you get into, whatever problem you're solving, I think the more you work with it, the more you see it in every day. You start seeing it, understanding the nuances for sure. Uh, so yeah, it's been good.
well, Matt and Jake, you guys were awesome. Thank you for sharing all the questions I had. And yeah, it was great to meet you again. Um, check out TaxJar. They're in our marketplace. They solve a very challenging problem that you have to do right. Don't try to roll it yourself. And thanks again for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks,
Thanks,
Chris.
Chris.